Welcome back, everybody. With the last technical session of the day, but no means least, welcome, Iain. Thanks for joining us. Iain's going to be talking about some Evergreen automation stuff, so keeping your Citrix environments up to date with the minimal possible effort, which is in my book. So after that, we'll have a couple of minutes break, and then we'll reconvene for the quiz with Nutanix. We'll also be doing the wrap up of the prize draw. Remember to ask your session questions at the top of the page, and also submit your session feedback as well, because that'll earn you prizes on the leaderboard. So with that, over to Iain.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the CUG team for letting us present today. So we're here to talk about Citrix Evergreen builds. So let's jump into it. So my name's Iain Brighton, CTO of Virtual Engine. Been in the end user compute space for the last 20 plus years. Active community member, presented at the CUG before. In the UK, been over to the Netherlands as well to present. Heavily involved in the PowerShell community as well. So involved in the London PowerShell user group and the PS Day events that occur on an annual basis. And I'm kind of a part-time amateur developer. So some of you may have heard of the Virtual Engine Toolkit, which was written many moons ago, helping users migrate from current deployments into what was then Res Workspace, but could be used with what was the Absence suite and general UEM tools moving forward, including web. I've also written Scribo, which is a PowerShell documentation framework, which, if you've seen the as-built documentation, is used heavily behind the scenes, and also Lability, which is around PowerShell DSC and Hyper-V, which I might come back onto at the end of this presentation if there is time or we have time to fill. So what are we going to go through today? Over the next sort of 40-45 minutes, going to run you through the what, why, and the why not of Evergreen from a Citrix perspective. We're going to touch on configuration as code and give people a brief introduction to PowerShell DSC. If it's not something that you're au fait with, there's some terminology that you need to be aware of. I'm going to run through a brief demo. Obviously, to run through a full demo would take probably longer than the time that we've got allotted, and then we're going to have a wrap up. Yeah. So just to clear a few things from terminology perspective, what I'm going to mention, as we go through the presentation, is definition of LTSR and current release. So by Citrix definition, bug fixes are included in both the LTSR and the current release. New features are typically only introduced in the new current releases. So every 3-4 months when there's new current release, that would include new functionality. Typically, new functionality is not going to be included in the LTSR releases. However, if you're on an LTSR release, you still may be required to upgrade to the latest cumulative update to receive a fix. They may not give you a hot fix for any issues that you're experiencing. So even customers on the LTSR channel are potentially going to have to upgrade fairly regularly, as well as obviously for the current release customers, it tends to be every 3-4 months. You may be able to stretch it out to 6 months if you can support's maintained for the previous 2 versions. So, you're going to have to keep deploying and upgrading your Citrix environment. And interestingly enough, and I know James mentioned this earlier when he was presenting, is only the long-term servicing release is now supported with cloud deployments. So in the latest cumulative current releases, you cannot deploy to the cloud, which I find strange, considering Citrix Cloud is kind of the alpha beta channel for the current release, which supports the cloud environments, but when you get the code, they don't support it. So read into that what you will. Are Citrix trying to push us to the cloud? Who knows? Yeah. So that's just a bit of terminology. So what do we mean by Evergreen? From this kind of presentation perspective. But what we're talking about is we're always deploying new. Yeah. We're never upgrading our environments. There's a caveat to that. Not everything is equally you're going to struggle. There's no you're never going to deploy Active Directory afresh every 3 months, for instance. It might be fun, but it would sure hell annoy the hell out of your users. So we're on about upgrading the Citrix infrastructure components. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. We deploy new. So we build, we test, we migrate, and then we tear down the previous environments. And this evergreen approach is not something new. We've been doing it for a while. We've been having, Citrix evergreen builds for virtual desktops, for RDSH, for Horizon View, or whatever. And recently we've had more of an emphasis on the evergreen packages. I mean, we as a company, we offer that as a service. We will deliver evergreen images for your end user compute environment and evergreen packages as a service to you. Yeah, so that's nothing new. What we're talking about here today is how do we provide an evergreen Citrix infrastructure to our customers. Yeah? So this is just more of an approach about how we do it and some of the technologies that we use. So as an example, here we have an existing Citrix 1909 deployment. We're talking about things like FAS, delivery controller, storefront in your database, and your VDAs are all running. We've got our access gateway, and we've got our load balancers for load balancing the internal delivery controllers and storefront, your standard typical Citrix deployment. We have some shared infrastructure components down the bottom, which are not typically going to be included in the evergreen deployment. You could include Director in there, so you could include Director as your evergreen deployment, or you might actually want to treat it like we do in a completely separate pipeline. So it is evergreen, it's just upgraded at a slightly different cadence, and obviously the configuration needs to span multiple Citrix sites at this time. So it's not that you can't do it. Just in this example, it's outside of that. And the same with the NetScaler. We're using a shared NetScaler here. We're upgrading and managing that outside of the environment. Absolutely, you can include that as part of your deployment. It just takes a little bit more work and effort, and you're going to need some good skills to do that. So our approach is, you've got your existing environment. What we will do is we will automate and deploy complete new infrastructure. Yeah, so we're talking about new FAS service delivery controllers, new databases, new storefront servers, new access gateways, and load balancers. Yeah, and then we'll test that, and then we'll put users on it, and then over time we'll migrate users from one environment to the other. And then once everyone's been migrated, then we blow the old environment away. Yeah, so if at any point during this process we have any issues or there are any problems, then we know that we can always roll back to the previous environment until we're at that point where everyone's been migrated and they're on the new platform. And guess what? When the next version comes along, we build and we automate and test the deployment of that, and then we again migrate users onto that environment. Once everyone's migrated, we blow it away. Yeah. So that's what we're meaning is this continual deployment. It's not just applicable to the current release. You can also use it for the long-term service release. So you can go from different cumulative updates. You can go between different versions. You can even use this process to go back. So for instance, if you deployed 2003 and you found that actually after you deployed all your users on it, you could then redeploy the 1912 configuration, because it's all in configurations code, and then you can start to migrate your users back onto it and then blow away that environment. So you've got this continually evolving and rolling upgrade process. Yeah. So there are certain technologies which can help you migrate your users between the two. You can stick as your traffic manager on to load balance your access gateways. You can use internal DNS aliases, all that sort of stuff, depending on your individual requirements. Yeah. So that's all well and good. So why do we want to go to all this trouble? Yeah. It seems like a lot of work, and it probably is, but we end up with a known repeatable deployment process. Yeah. So if we know that we can redeploy our environment at any time, and we know it's reliable, and we can, we tested it and it's, used, we know that time after time, we're in a good place. Yeah. In addition, we can deploy to any infrastructure. So if you're currently running on VMware, you could take the same approach. You could move to Hyper-V, you can move to Nutanix, you can even go to AWS, you can even go to Azure or any other provider. Yeah. Subject to the the support requirements for, in this particular instance, for Citrix, but we can use this to migrate and or for DR purposes, for instance. We're also reducing the amount of risks. I don't know how many people have had problems upgrading Citrix. I guess it depends on how many Citrix deployments you touch, whether you might see more failures than others, but I'm sure we've all seen failures to, site upgrades, storefront servers. So we take those risks out of the equation because we deploy brand new infrastructure. It's all done as configuration as code. So everything, we know exactly what we deployed for the last time, so we can make sure we deploy the same for the next time, right? And by doing that, we minimize configuration drift. The fact that we are talking about configuration as code, things are in text files, stored in source control. So we have the ability, change tracking comes as part of that. You can see what's changed between different commits, different builds. And of course, because everything is documented in text documents, and you can see the changes between them, you've also got a self-documenting environment. If it's not in the configuration, it's not going out into your production environment. So we have the ability to, roll forward and roll back, change control, all that sort of stuff. So they're the good things, right? Why wouldn't we do this? So the two primary reasons that I see pushback from customers on this is it's a complete paradigm shift when it comes to management. So no longer are you next, finish, go in here, create a delivery group, add an app, do this, do that. You need to spend time investing in the automation infrastructure to do that for you. And don't get me wrong, it takes a lot of investment. I presented on some of the philosophies that you're seeing in here 5 years ago at the Citrix user group and at E2E as well, around the whole using DSC and configurations code to deploy Citrix infrastructure. And what we're doing today is built upon those foundations. It requires a lot of upfront investment, and then it's not like once it's done, you can then just drop it and move along. You do need to maintain it. Citrix are forever making changes to the PowerShell commandlets or snap-ins or whatever they're using. In the latest 1912 release, they upgraded one of their modules from a snap-in to a PowerShell module, and they also changed the installation locations for those modules and all sorts, which end up breaking things that needed to be fixed. So you do need to invest the time up front and maintain it as it goes along, right? On top of that, you've got additional infrastructure requirements. So you've got your production deployment today, which may be using, you may have a couple of delivery controllers, you might have multiple zones, you've got FAS servers, storefronts, directors, whatever it is. And then ultimately we're saying is that when you want to upgrade, we then need to deploy the same again. And then you need to deploy some additional VDAs, if you're testing and UAT and then migration onto that platform. So you do need some additional infrastructure capacity to do that. And we can't even count on Azure these days, to provide us that capacity as and when we need it. So there are additional costs for that. In addition to deploying a complete new infrastructure, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we've now got two data islands, or potential islands of information. So you've got one infrastructure where you have users running, you've got your configuration logging, you've got your monitoring, and then we're deploying a complete new infrastructure which has completely separate configuration logging and monitoring and all that sort of stuff. So you do need additional tools, stroke processes on top of that to be able to get a unified view over the installations. Otherwise, you then got to log into one, or the users have been migrated over to this environment, so they need to go and log in over there. So you do need some additional tooling around that. I think it goes without saying that you need good automation skills. It's not difficult. you know, if you're invested in things like PowerShell, you can talk to REST APIs. So when you're talking about automating NetScaler deployments, configurations, they're not difficult. You just need to have a good handle on that. It's not someone who's just picked up PowerShell, for instance, probably isn't going to jump straight in here. You could get there pretty quickly, but you do need to have good automation skills. And the fact that everything's configuration is code, you know, everything is done in code rather than manual clicking in the interface. And as I mentioned earlier, not everything is a good fit. Yeah, so things like Active Directory, for instance, yeah, you're not going to be deploying your Active Directory environments to migrate for you to migrate your users to a new Zen desktop deployment. So you just got to be careful. You don't, what I'm going to show you don't have to do everything in one go. So you could just use this process for storefront, right? Or your site databases, or, you know, FAS, whatever you need to do. Just in this example, they're kind of all lumped into one, because typically in the current release, you need to upgrade all of those components, but they could be in separate pipelines managed in different repositories. So how do we do it? So as I mentioned, we use configuration as code. And what we're ultimately talking about is just the separation of what we want from the how we achieve it. Yeah, and to do that, we use PowerShell DSC. I strongly recommend you use PowerShell DSC version 2, which came in with Windows Server 2016. The presentation I did 5 years ago was on 2012 R2 version 4 of WMF. And it was certainly rough around the edges. There are some big improvements in version 5. For instance, the cross-node dependencies. So when we're deploying a new infrastructure, we can tell, you know, machines that we've allocated to controller VMs to wait until the site is up before they apply their configuration. So you know that whole cross-node interdependencies you don't have to worry so much about. And also the built-in keyword for when we're running a DSC resource, we can tell it under which user credential to run. Yeah? So this gets around the restriction in version 4, where everything was running as local system, and then you had to configure cred SSP because Citrix needs to install as a domain account. Local system's not good enough, so you end up a whole load of double hop and cred SSP nightmares that I went through 5 years ago. A lot of those issues have gone out, you know, are no longer applicable, but certainly stick with WMF5, so 2016 and onwards. Yeah. And the fact that we're using PowerShell DSC in this example here, you can actually use any configuration management tool. So Chef, Puppet, Ansible, they all natively support DSC resources. So the bit that does the heavy lifting, the bit that does the how, is a DSC resource. It's a PowerShell module, and it does the making sure that, you know, what we're defining that we want is actually implemented. All of these configuration management tools support DSC. So what you're going to see here is not just to see if you're using any of them, is equally applicable, you know, to DSC. So for those people that aren't au fait with PowerShell DSC, I'm going to go through some terminology just so that when I show you how we do it, hopefully it's not totally alien to you. So at the heart of DSC on the end node basis, so the machines that you want to become a storefront server or delivery controller, WMF5 installs a local configuration manager. Yeah, so we configure the LCM as it's known, and we tell it where it needs to pull any configurations or DSC resources from, and we can also configure the configuration, the mode that we want the LCM to run in. So in the example that you're going to see here is we just do an apply only. So we deploy the new infrastructure and then DSC steps out of the way. But you can also tell it to deploy the infrastructure and, you know, either monitor it and log any configuration drift or automatically rectify any drift. So if you said in your DSC configuration, you wanted these published desktops and they need to be assigned to these users, you know, based on with these settings, if you configure the LCM in apply and auto-correct mode, if anyone goes into Studio and changes them, the next time DSC comes along, it's going to put them back. Yeah? So you get around, you know, have a way of locking in a configuration that you want. Now, the LCM itself takes managed object format files, MOF files. They're a SIM standard. They're just Unicode text files, which detail all of the resources and all the settings that you want to apply, and obviously, any dependencies within those resources. You'll see this, they are just text files. You're not going to be handcrafting them. You're going to be using PowerShell. Well, in this example we are, but you don't have to. Other configuration management tooling will do this for you. So if you use things like Azure DSC, it will compile the MOF files on the fly and apply them. You get the LCM to apply them. And then we've got the heavy lifting piece, which is the whole DSC resources. These PowerShell modules, most of them are open source. At the end of the presentation, there's some resource links which shows you them. Obviously, the Zen Desktop 7 module that we're talking about here is obviously, it's a virtual engine module. It's open source. It's published on GitHub. It's published to the PowerShell gallery. You can go and use it. That's what we're using. Failing that, if there is not a DSC resource available to you, publicly on the gallery or whatever, you can write your own. They are just PowerShell modules. So as long as you've got PowerShell skills, and hopefully there's PowerShell commandlets for the stuff that you want to configure, then it makes your life a lot easier. You just need to write 3 functions and make sure you code them correctly. Yep. And then the last bit is configurations and configuration data, and this is PowerShell specific. Yeah? So we're talking, the configuration keyword is PowerShell specific. It's what we use for creating the managed object format files that are enacted by the nodes. So here's an example. In version 4 and onwards, we can create configuration, and what we are saying here is we can pass in a computer name that we want to generate a configuration for. But we can say we want a file resource, and we want to make sure that a directory C reports exists. Yeah? We're not telling anyone how to actually do that. All we're saying is our configuration is this is what we would like, and then we leave the heavy lifting to the underlying resources. Similarly, we want a service, the Windows Update service, to be set to running on automatic. Yeah? We're not saying how to do it, we're just saying this is what we want. Yeah? And then we've also got a Windows feature here saying we want to install the RDS-RD server role. We want to make sure it's present, but notice there's a depends on, so we can have a dependency that says we only want this Windows feature resource to run if the service resource is correct. Yeah? So we can create this configuration of what we would like without detailing how to do it. Yeah? And when we create a configuration, it spits out a MOF file, and it's just a text file. And you can see it's a textual representation of what we've defined in our configuration. You're not going to be handcrafting these, but you could do, if you didn't want to use PowerShell to generate your configurations. So let's have a demo. So I have a machine here. This is just a standard Windows 10 machine that I'm going to use to author my configurations. I have my configuration data in a PSD1 file, which is a PowerShell data file, kind of similar to a JSON file. If you're used to PowerShell, it's just a hash table. And then I have my DSC configuration that I'm going to define in PowerShell, and I'm going to apply my configuration data that I've got defined here to this configuration. Yeah. So what have we got in our configuration file? So this is, if you were deploying for a particular customer, in our scenario, we would have a configuration file for a customer, which would detail all of the nodes and the roles that we wanted to install. Yeah? So we're saying here that I've got 2 delivery controllers that I want. I want to, the roles that they have on them are delivery controller and studio. And then I have 2 FAS servers. Yeah, and then I have 2 storefront servers. Yeah. There is an assumption here that these machines are machines that are already present and joined to the domain, but nothing more. Right? So this configuration doesn't provision the VMs. You need to make sure you can do that by whatever means. So these are the VMs, presumably. They might be on physical hosts, who knows, that we want to generate a configuration for. And then under my non-node data section, down here, as you can see that I've got various configuration options. I'm telling it in my customer environment, or this demo environment, where are my DSC resources that the nodes need to download. I could push configurations to them if I wanted to. I'm specifying some Active Directory information. You'll see this being used shortly. But the meat of the configuration for the customer is, specified under here. So under Zen Desktop, we're telling it which version we want to deploy. And that's used to locate the media. The version number here gets concatenated with my file share location. So I've downloaded the 1912 release and extracted it into a folder under this Citrix folder. I then tell it what site information I want. So I'm telling it I want my site called CVAD and then a version number. There are various tokens that we can include in this config. They're up here. So we can, in our configuration, we can have tokens for domain names, DNs, common names, various version numbers of Citrix as well. So here's our Active Directory. We're saying this is what our, this is where we're going to create our site databases, login database and monitor database. This is what we're going to be called. I'm specifying the licensing information for my environment. Remember, the license server is not part of this configuration. I guess you could, I wouldn't recommend it due to needing to have cut a new license for every deployment you want to do. And then what site configuration do we want to apply? We want to trust XML request sent to the service report and any delegation that we want. So we want to delegate these are my administrators, and then what roles do I want to define within Studio. And this is very simple config. The DSC resources that are available in the module you can create in here. Typically, you'd have definitions for machine catalogs and delivery groups, published applications, all that sort of stuff. Any certificate information, so we're going to generate certificate requests for the machines. And then what about my storefront configuration? Well, I'm going to tell it I want this is my base URL. It's going to generate certificate requests for my storefront servers. Any host files that I want applied, host entries, sorry, and then authentication services. So I'm going to create 2 authentication services for my storefront. I'm going to create 2 stores. Just your standard store web, and then I've got, I can tell it which common options I want, hide domains, whether I want a load balance, transport type and configuration, port sockets, all that sort of stuff, right? All of these settings that you're seeing here, they're just settings within the DSC resources themselves. So I'm going to take all of these settings, and if you're familiar with PowerShell terminology, we're going to splat these against the DSC resources. So if you didn't want to, specify this, you could just delete it, or you could set it to false, one and not the other, right? And then I got some NetScaler stuff. The only reason I got the NetScaler stuff on is because it details the access gateways which are used to configure the FAS store for external access. So I have my configuration data, and of course that is specific for one customer or demo customer lab environment in this scenario. I could then create a new configuration for a different customer if I need to, and adjust all settings if necessary and deploy. So how do we take what we got here and generate our configs? Well, there's a handy function around splatting DSC resources, which is from a guy called Gal Colas. If you're involved in a PowerShell user group, Gal's well known. He now contracts for Microsoft. He's working on DSC for PowerShell 7. And is actively involved in the PowerShell and DSC communities. But he's got a pseudo function that can be used to splat against DSC resources, because you can't natively do that. So within my configuration, I'm not going to tell you that. Here's my configuration for my LCM. So we need to configure the local configuration manager on the agents. So here I'm telling the nodes whether they should automatically reboot if needed, whether to run in debug mode, the configuration mode, right? We set it to apply only, but that could be apply and autocorrect. And then we tell it where to download the DSC resources. Note that this comes from the configuration data. So that's for configuring the LCM. And then here is our true DSC configuration from a Zen desktop perspective. So here we're massaging some data to generate those tokens that I showed you at the top of the PSD1 file, to generate the major update version, full version, short version, that sort of stuff. And then I'm going through and calculating DN, generating DNs, common names, all that sorts for all of my nodes that are in my configuration, because certain resources need different parameters in different formats. Typical. Yeah. But ultimately, I'm going to end up with a primary delivery controller. So of all of my nodes that are defined to install the delivery controller role, one's going to be designated primary. So I'm going to select the first one that's in the list, and then all my secondary ones is going to be everything except the first one. Okay, because obviously we only need to create the site on the first one. The other delivery controllers just need to join the site. And obviously all delivery controllers which we use when we're configuring the farm settings within Storefront. And then we're going through, and grabbing some configuration data. Yeah, so Active Directory is grabbing information out of this Active Directory node here. Yeah, just a shortcut rather than having to specify $configuration data .non-node data .active directory. It's just a lot easier within our configuration to just reference the AD data, which references this part within my configuration. So I'm saying for every node, install the roles. So FAS is a little bit different. It's a different setup file to all the others installation options. So just if you specify you want a FAS server, it installs FAS and then it installs all the other roles using the features command. Yeah, these are DSC resources. So we're going to install the required roles that are flagged via the configuration data, and then for everyone where there's designated a controller within my configuration data, if the certificate information is present in my configuration data, I'm going to generate a certificate request. Yeah. So in this scenario, my configuration data points to my CA. So here's my CA and the FQDN. It's going to generate a certificate that's obviously going to be used as a web service certificate. That's going to be used for HTTPS communication internally. So we can automate the certificate request and installation of certificates for delivery controllers and for storefronts as well. So we generate a certificate request, but only if that is if that's in our configuration. And then for the primary delivery controller, yeah, I'm going to create site database, logging database, monitor database. I'm then going to create my site. Yeah. Notice that we are basically just splatting, yeah, things that are coming out of my configuration data file. Yeah. So we're then going to create a site. We're then, if you specify licensing information, we're then going to configure the site licensing. If you specify site configuration, then we're going to run that as well. And then if we've got any delegation configured, if I've got any administrators, is then going to go through and add in via the XD7 administrator resource, create those administrators, and then assign them to the role that is assigned within my configuration data. And obviously the secondary delivery controller, notice that there's this cross-node dependency, so it's going to wait for the site to become available before the secondary delivery controllers will try and join it. For storefront, I'm going to go through, I'm going to install storefront. I'm going to create, well, up here, I'm going to do my certificate request. I'm going to configure any host files that are in my configuration data. I'm then going to install the base storefront, and then I'm going to bind HTTPS, yeah, to IIS. And then for for each authentication service, I'm going to register them. For each stores, I'm then going to go through and create my stores within storefront. And if I have Netscaler access gateways defined, it's then going to go through. If I expand this, and it's going to create me a storefront roaming gateway. You notice a lot of these names match the PowerShell commandlets, yeah, which the DSC resources are just a wrapper for. So he's going to add a storefront, and then he's going to register that to a store. So we're going to take this configuration, and we're going to generate the files, and we can then push that configuration to all of my nodes. So how do we do this? Well, to generate my MOF files for my agents, I need to install the DSC resources that are required. And in this example, there's only 4 DSC resources that are required. Obviously, the certificate one is for managing the certificate requests. Networking DSC does the host files. It can also do networking. Yeah, so things like local IP addresses, DNS server, all that sort of stuff. This is the Zen Desktop 7 one, and then the X Web Administration one is used to bind certificates to manage the IIS bindings. So It helps if I don't just try and run that. So I'm just going to install the module. The modules are actually already installed on this machine, so it's not going to reinstall them. But I can then install these modules. I'm installing them in the scope of my user account. I should put a verbose on there. Yeah, so they're all installed, and you can see them in here. Yeah, so if I come into my user account, Windows PowerShell modules, they're the 4 PowerShell modules. Set my path. I'm going to grab some credentials. I mentioned that Citrix requires it's got to run under a domain account, so this is just a lab administrator account. So I'm just going to create credential object, and now I'm going to register my configuration. So in here, the configuration keyword is you need to run this file for it to define these configurations, and we can then call them. Yeah. So I'm just going to .source this file, and then I'll have what do I call them? So if I do CG, I should see them. Yeah. So here I'm going to run the configuration. Oh, it didn't .source them, that's why. Now it should be there. There you go. So I now have, they look like commandlets or functions that I can call. Yeah. So based on my configuration, so I have my DSC configuration and my LCM configuration. Yeah. So here I'm going to generate my LCM configs for my nodes. I'm going to put them in the folder called this, and the configuration data, I'm just pointing at this file, this PSD1 file. So it's going to generate the LCM configs for all of my nodes that I've got defined, and spit out a file that I can then apply to those machines. Yeah? So you just do set DSC local configuration manager, and you can push those to those nodes, and that will configure them, tell it where to download the resources and what configuration mode you want. And then I can now generate my actual config files, so my MOF files. So this is generating the individual text documents that you need to push to those machines or configure them to pull, where they will actually do the install. So they'll actually install all the components and apply all of the configuration that we defined. So if we just have a quick look at one of these. So I'm not going to look at the MetaMoth files, but if I pick on my DDC. So here's a configuration file that you can push. You can take, you could go and apply this to any machine. It wouldn't have to be this machine. But in here, it defines, this is where I want to install, what roles I want installed. So I want controller in Studio, where to pull the information from. Obviously, you can see that passwords are in plain text. You can secure them certificates. I just didn't want to complicate things here. But yeah, normally you would make sure that they're encrypted. Here's a certificate request that this machine's then going to go and make, and all of the details. So you can see all of the subjects alternative names that are going to be in the certificate request for this particular node. So I'm going to go and create my database. So here's my SQL database server. Is a database name that I want, and the credentials that it's going to run under. So I can take all of these configurations and push all of these to my nodes. Yeah. And in this scenario, it'd probably take about half hour after all the reboots, and you'd have a fully functioning core infrastructure of delivery controllers in the new database, 2 new storefront servers configured exactly as you want, 2 stores, FAS store, FAS installed. Requires a little bit more configuration after that, but if you've got the automation skills, then it's not not impossible to do, right? So the beauty of this is I've got my configuration. I've deployed my 1912 deployment. What happens when 2003 comes out? Well, for us to deploy a brand new 2003 environment, it's actually quite simple. And this is this whole configuration as code. If I was to take a copy of my existing configuration data, and I call this 2003, and I come in here and open this one, right? So in here, say for instance, I wanted, and of course these machines can be called anything you like. I'm just using the version in here, just so it's easy to see, right? Obviously, you need to make sure an Active Directory, that the OU that's referenced further down, obviously each environment is installed into separate OUs, because you need different GPOs to apply your VDA registrations. But for instance, in here, I may say, well, actually now I want 3 delivery controllers. And then I could have a, I may say I want director on the node as well. And then down here, I need to update. This is just updating all the references. This is the version number that's used in all of the naming conventions. So I save that configuration. So I made that's the only change I've made. For the new environment. Typically, you wouldn't do that. You just deploy the same again. You just update the version number. So I can come in here. If I take this and tell it that I want to put the files in this path, and I want to use this configuration data as well. If I was to run this, I'm now going to end up with a whole load of set of files that are pointing, it'll create me a new database, on the existing SQL server. You can see I've now got 3 files for 3 delivery controllers, still got 2 phases, still got 2 storefronts, and now I've got a director machine as well. So I can now go and push these configurations to those machines, and they will converge on the configuration that we've got defined. So where next? What you're seeing is configuration as code. The next logical step is infrastructure as code. So how do you create the VMs? You need to define them in code as well. So you're looking at the likes of ARM, CloudFormation templates, or Terraform. You can then obviously use release pipelines to, you check in the code, it automatically deploys the environment, runs some automated infrastructure testing. If that's all good, then you can move on to UAT testing. If not, you blow it all away and rinse and repeat. If you watched the E2E VC session on Saturday, Sanisha and Benedict did a session on this using Terraform with Azure DevOps pipelines and the Citrix, the Zen Desktop 7 module that you've seen here with PowerShell DSC to do that. So it's not impossible. They're doing it. They're offering it as a service. So people are absolutely doing this. So that's the next logical step. Just too much to get over in 40 minutes, considering it took them over 2 hours. So some resources. I've put the code that I've shown today and the slides. We're all up on GitHub. If you want to go and download the Zen Desktop 7 resources, there's a link there. For all the other DSC community DSC resources, they're on GitHub as well, DSC community. Lability, if you want to test this stuff locally, Lability just makes it easy because it uses the same configuration file to spin up local lab test environments on Hyper-V. And if DSC is completely new to you, you'll want to dig into it. There's an excellent Channel 9 series hosted by Jeffrey Snova and Jason Helmick around the whole, what is DSC, how it fits together, writing your own custom resources, etc. I think that's me done. Questions?
Thank you, Ian. Very interesting. There's a few questions that come through online. One of them, isn't Windows PowerShell DSC dead?
Typical. Yeah, sort of, kind of, maybe not. So Windows PowerShell, as we know it, there is no further development, right? So Windows PowerShell 5.1 is the last iteration. Microsoft may put the odd bug fix in, but all investment is in PowerShell. Well, what was PowerShell Core, now just PowerShell, version 7. The LCM is going away, right? So in the newer versions of PowerShell, bearing in mind that the DSC story is not complete yet, in version 7.2, so 7.1 will be coming out soon. It's earmarked for 7.2 to bring back the DSC kind of functionality in PowerShell. But the LCM is not going to be there. Having said that, Citrix relies on Windows PowerShell. In fact, some of the resources that we're using is still PowerShell snapping, so they were deprecated in PowerShell 2. So over 10 years ago, and some of Citrix code is still using that. So how quickly is Citrix going to be able to move to PowerShell core? Probably not in the next 10 years. So, so it's not dead, it's just changing slightly moving forward.
Cool. Well, is how could you avoid plain text passwords appearing in your scripts?
So in a DSC configuration, you can, when you compile your configurations under your nodes, you can tell it which public certificate that you want to use. So assuming your nodes have got certificates on and you have the public certs registered on the machine that you're authoring the configuration, is you can secure the credentials using the public key of each node certificate, and obviously only that node can decrypt the credentials that are in
there. Okay. How could you ensure unique server host names when building new servers all the time?
Well, I mean, that's more of an infrastructure as code, Chris. So what I've shown you today is you've got to provision the machines and add them to Active Directory, right? How you do that is up to you. Obviously, different customers do things in different ways. You know, some of our customers will use pipelines and automatically deploy these and add them as a domain and then apply the DSC configuration. In this scenario that I've shown today, there is no guarantee, but we're not building and deploying and adding those machines to Active Directory. In my configuration, I'm telling which existing machines I want to apply configuration to.
Cool. Last question, are you deploying storefront server groups in the configuration?
We're not, no. So there are two parts to this. One is, why do you need a server group? If everything is configuration as code, you're not making any changes. So whether we deploy 1 or 10 servers, they're all configured exactly the same. So therefore, we don't need to replicate any changes from a configuration point of view between them. The other one is around the whole subscriptions. So for our customers, we will store the subscription information in an external database, SQL database, rather than configuring a group. But absolutely, you could do that if you wanted to. Yeah, you can automate that. And I think the guys that demoed the E2E VC event, they certainly have their own custom resource for creating a server group, for instance. But we don't do that. No, we don't see a need.
Cool. Okay. No more questions. If any questions people are typing, add them to the Q&A box at the top of the screen. Otherwise, thank you very much, Iain. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Remember, the sessions will be online on demand immediately after this meeting. We've got a few minutes break, then we're going to reconvene to sort out the prize draw and the leaderboard. Yeah, it'll be in this session, so you don't need to change any screens. We're just going to go on mute for a second here, change presenters, and then we'll reconvene here. So you don't need to close any windows.
Welcome back, everybody. I just want to thank Iain Brighton for an excellent presentation earlier. So we've got a couple of bits of housekeeping to do at the end. So I just want to thank our Diamond sponsor, ControlUp, again for helping us out. You've given us a lot of great feedback. You seem to really enjoy the platform we've used today. So if we are in the situation where we have to continue doing digital events, then we'll definitely continue to use this platform, seeing as we've got such good feedback on it. More than anything else, we're not finished yet. We've got the excellent quiz run by our sponsor Nutanix coming up, but I want to thank you for attending so far, at least. What we're going to do is we've got a couple of prizes to give away. We've got the first prize for on the leadership board for the points, and we've also decided that we'll give out a participation prize as well. So we'll pick a name at random from the list of people who are kind enough to participate in the leaderboard. There is one problem though. I believe we have a tie break at the front of the leaderboard. Is that correct, Neil?
We do indeed, yeah. So we've got two joint leaders at the moment, so Nathan and Ronnie. So we're going to have a bit of a tie break question to determine the winner. So Nathan and Ronnie, hopefully you're both still with us. If not, one might win by default because they're not here to answer the question. If both of us are not here, then we'll just, I guess, we'll split the prize between them, right? So the question is, so the way you answer this is in the community chat on the website. Post your answers there. So only Nathan and Rory need to do this, not everybody else. Don't give them hints by posting the answer if you know it. So the winner will be the closest person to the correct answer. So, guys,
and in the event that they're both correct, the fastest wins.
Correct. Yeah, and we'll give you about 10 seconds to complete this, so you can't have too long trying to Google the answer. So, Nathan and Ronnie, hopefully you're ready. You've got the community chat page open to type your answers. So the question is, when did Windows Virtual Desktop go into GA release? The date.
I feel like we should have the countdown music going.
Yep. So I'm counting down from 10 seconds. So hopefully we'll wait until the live stream catches up.
Yep. I kind of hope that like Nathan and Ronnie were like doing something else and they've had to rush back to their laptops or computers. There's all a big panic in their head. They're listening to us do it. So that's not a date, Nathan. That but
month and a day.
Yeah.
But let's give a chance to see if we get any more answers in. If not, then we'll nominate Nathan the winner. I think that's it. So.
Oh, hang on. Oh, I think that Ronnie wins that one. having got the exact date correct.
Yeah, that's true. Well done, Ronnie. Congratulations to you, sir. We did pick a random participant from the leaderboard as well, just to say thank you for participating. So we've done a bit of a randomizer in Excel. And the winner of, I think it's a £25 Amazon gift card. So the winner gets 100. The random one was, in my spreadsheet, it was Tom Hardiman. So look in your email, Tom, if you're still with us, for the gift voucher. Congratulations.
Absolutely.
So following this, we've got our Nutanix quiz, which we launched in the other session window as all the other sessions today. So thank you to all the presenters and our sponsors. It's been great on the new platform. Thank you to the outsourced events team as well behind the scenes. It's a bit like Wizard of Oz, pedaling like crazy, making sure everything keeps to time. So thank you to all those guys there.
Neil, you and I, we're both going to be around for the VBAs and the open discussion.
Yeah, so after the 10x quiz, will be I'll just launching my GoToMeeting. Anyone who wants to just hang around and have a chat can join that. You're most welcome. The link is in that particular session.
Yeah, and don't just leave me and Neil talking to each other.
Yeah. Hopefully not. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody.
Yep,
Hope you've had a good day.